A drainage crew opened a hatch beneath an abandoned asylum this spring, and what waited at the bottom of the tunnel was never explained to the public. They were following a runoff map that day, expecting an old steam line. Instead, they found a passage that appears on no blueprint, sealed from the inside, leading somewhere the county still refuses to discuss. A sealed tunnel was found under an abandoned asylum, and its end was never explained. The institution was the kind of place America built by the hundreds and then chose to forget. A Kirkbride hospital, opened in the 1880s, was designed from the ground up as a self-sufficient town. It had its own power plant, its own working farm, its own water supply, even its own rail spur to haul in the mountains of coal it burned every winter. And underneath all of it ran the tunnels, miles of them, brick-lined arteries carrying steam, electrical wiring, and people the outside world had quietly decided not to look at anymore. At its peak, 3,000 patients lived inside these walls, and 1,000 staff worked with them. The tunnels themselves were dug by patient labor, hand-cut over years and called work therapy, though in practice it was unpaid work extracted from people who could not refuse. Less than a mile away, in a field nobody ever bothered to mow, sat more than 1,500 graves, most marked with nothing but a number on a small iron stake. That single detail explains how the place actually worked. A person arrived with a name. If they died here, they left as a digit pressed into the dirt and rounded off by history. The hospital closed decades ago. The grand buildings were left to the weather, the vandals, and the slow, patient work of the roots, their windows gone, their wards stripped to the plaster. And the tunnels, according to every record the county kept, were sealed for good. This past spring, that record stopped being true. A survey crew was mapping storm runoff beneath the footprint of the demolished East Wing when their ground-penetrating scanner returned an anomalous reading. A void. A long, straight, hollow space sitting exactly where the old utility map promised solid, undisturbed Earth. They assumed it was an uncharted steam tunnel that had never been planned, and they went down to confirm it and close the file. The way in was an old maintenance hatch, rusted but whole, its hinges packed solid with 80 years of clay and root. When they finally pried it open, the air that rose out of the shaft was wrong. Cold, bone-dry, and faintly metallic, like the inside of an old tin can. One of the crew later described it as the smell of a room that had been holding its breath for half a century. They climbed down a steel ladder, maybe 15 feet, into a passage just tall enough for a grown man to stand upright. This is where the official story first begins to fall apart. The walls down here weren't the warm red brick of the rest of the campus. They were poured concrete, smooth and gray and cold. And the asylum's tunnels were never ever built from poured concrete. The deeper the passage ran, the less it resembled anything in the county's files. The brick arteries curved gently between the old buildings, hand-laid by patient labor in the previous century. This passage ran dead straight, reinforced with rusted steel I-beams, sloping steadily downward at an engineered grade. It wasn't part of the hospital at all. The hospital, slowly it became clear, had been sitting on top of it the whole time. Then came the markings. Stenciled onto a corroded junction box, faded but perfectly legible, were 2 words and a date: Civil Defense, 1961. The asylum was already 70 years old by then. Someone had come in at the height of the Cold War, excavated beneath a fully active mental hospital, and built something they never disclosed to the patients sleeping above them or the staff who worked there every day. And there was no better place on earth to hide a secret government project than directly underneath a building the public had already been trained, for generations, to look away from. The first chamber confirmed the worst of it. A long, low concrete room lined with rows of corroded steel shelving, stacked with a hoard unrelated to medicine. Crates of emergency rations sealed in oilcloth, sealed steel water drums, hand-crank radios, neat coils of copper antenna wire, and a wooden rack of military-issue gas masks, their rubber straps long since crumbled to black powder. Every item dated to the early 1960s, the years when the country was digging in against a war it believed was coming any week. This was a fallout shelter, or a listening post, or quietly both, engineered for a small handful of chosen people to outlast something the rest of the country was never told was coming. Whoever had access to it would survive. Everyone in the wards above them, and everyone in the town beyond, was never meant to know the option existed. And then came the detail that turns the stomach. The bunks were bolted to the concrete floor, 6 of them in 2 tidy rows. On the wall above each bunk, scratched painstakingly into the concrete by a human hand, was a name. Not a number, like the 1,500 forgotten souls in the field outside. A name. Someone down here in the dark had been desperate to be remembered as a person, not a statistic. But the deeper they went, the stranger it got. Past the bunk room, the corridor split in 2, and one branch had been deliberately and crudely blocked, not collapsed by time. Blocked. Dozens of bags of concrete were poured one on top of another, sealing a doorway from the near side, from the inside. Whoever did it had walled it off on purpose, and the tool marks gouged into the dried surface were not from the 1960s. They were rough, uneven, hand-cut, and far more recent. Decades after the bunker was abandoned, someone had come back down here alone and tried to close this one passage off forever. What they were so afraid of was on the other side. No one could say. What they were trying to keep out, or, standing in front of that wall in the beam of a single flashlight, what they were trying to keep in. The crew should have stopped there. Instead, they went looking for the paperwork, and it only made things worse. The county had dutifully filed the asylum's complete tunnel maps when the site was condemned. The maps were thorough, professional, and every last steam line and junction was accounted for in ink. And this concrete passage, this entire buried complex, appears on none of them. Officially, on paper, the structure does not exist. It was never permitted, never inspected, never decommissioned, for the simple reason that, as far as the public record is concerned, it was never built. So the crew did what almost anyone would have done. They came back the next morning with picks and sledgehammers, and they opened the wall. It took most of a day. The air that first pushed through the gap was foul, a thick organic stink of rot and cold wet stone with something faintly, sickeningly sweet riding underneath it. When the hole was finally wide enough to push a flashlight through, the beam didn't land on concrete on the far side. It didn't land on anything man-made at all. The bunker had been dug straight into the wall of a natural cave, and the walls of that cave were glowing. A faint green light clung to every surface, soft and steady, rising and fading in slow waves, as if the rock itself were drawing breath. For one long moment, it looked alive, deliberate, aware of them, as though something down there had been waiting in the dark and was lit from within. This, surely, was the thing the local legends had circled for 100 years, the reason for the wall, the presence in the deep. Except there was no presence. It was foxfire. The glow was bioluminescent fungus, the pale green mycelium of honey mushrooms threading through the rotting wooden shoring the Cold War engineers had left behind. It is a real, well-documented phenomenon. The cause of foxfire was first identified in 1823 when miners noticed that the timber support beams inside their shafts appeared to shine faintly in the pitch dark and, on closer inspection, found a fungus feeding on the wet wood. The light it gives off is cold, dim, and a strange greenish blue, And to anyone with no idea what they are looking at, it looks for all the world like something supernatural. For 60 years, the most frightening thing in this tunnel was a mushroom. But that is not where the story ends. The fungus was feeding on something, growing fat on it. And in the center of that glowing cave, half swallowed by the pale green growth, the flashlight finally found the rest of it. Cots, a folding metal table, a dead kerosene lamp, and the remains of the people the bunker had been built to save. They had come down here in the early 60s, sealed themselves in for a drill or for the real thing, and the heavy door had jammed shut behind them. The ventilation shaft that should have run clean to the surface had been crushed decades later when the east wing was demolished overhead by a crew with no way of knowing there was anyone beneath their feet. The shelter built to keep these people alive had quietly, patiently become the thing that killed them. The careful names scratched above the bunks weren't a warning to intruders. They were a guest book for a tomb. That faint coppery sweetness threaded through the foul air had been there all along. There was one last thing. A small rusted metal box set in the center of the folding table, and inside it a single sheet of paper, the writing pressed hard and deep into the page by a shaking hand. It wasn't a government log or an official report. It was a final message. It read, "If you are reading this, the door did not open. We did everything we were told. It was not enough. Do not let them build over us. Do not let them forget there were people down here." The line at the bottom trailed off the edge of the page into nothing, and someone had read it. Decades later, a lone figure with the hand tools had found this room, understood exactly what it was, and could not bring himself to leave it open to the world. He never reported it. He never dug out the bodies or called the county. He simply walled it back up, one bag of concrete at a time, and let the mountain keep them, exactly the way the note had begged. There was never a monster under the asylum, no anomaly, no ancient presence, no hungry thing that sleeps in the earth. There was a government that built a shelter and never came back for the people it left inside. A hospital that buried its dead under numbers in an unmarked field, and a forgotten handful of human beings who followed every rule they were given and were erased anyway, sealed away once by accident and a second time out of mercy. The county sealed the site again within days of the discovery. No statement, no inquiry, no names released. And that silence is the part that lingers. If a place can swallow people this completely once, and the only person who ever found them chose to wall them back into the dark, then the real question was never what was down there. It was how many other doors are still closed, and how many names are still waiting behind them to be read.